You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel. Next guest in the studio, it's Kate, and Kate is one of 3 sound artists for our project Arts Transmission. Kate, it's great to have you in the studio.
That's great to be here. Thanks, Daniel.
I was wondering if you could perhaps give us a little bit of an introduction and if you tell us a little bit about yourself in general.
Okay. Right, yes, let's think, where shall I start? Well, I guess my interest in radio and sound began about 10 years ago or so when I started working for the BBC as a development producer in radio drama based in Birmingham. Before that, I'd really been working in theatre mostly. Working in all different aspects of theatre, so in education, in professional theatre, doing a bit of writing and directing. But and it was because really of the writing that I ended up working in radio. I started off working with new writers and helping them develop ideas for radio plays, for Radio 4 mainly. And as part of that, I got trained up as a radio drama director. So I sort of had this really steep learning curve being introduced to radio and radio drama, and I was just really excited by it. I think it was just I was just really inspired, and it was great to be able to make drama for the BBC, but I also kind of got interested in it in a sort of bigger way, really. I sort of wanted to experiment with it a bit, and so alongside me developing new plays and directing radio plays for Radio 4 eventually, which is what I did, I also started thinking about how I could apply those skills but in other ways, really. And obviously I started working with people who were making different kinds of radio programmes, features, producers, and I suppose it also appealed a bit to the journalist in me, because when I first left Kent University back in 1988, I started off as a journalist for a couple of years in Kent, and I think there was something about radio that appealed to that side of me as well, actually.
So it was a kind of different direction as such to what you'd imagine sort of happened as you went along in your career.
Yeah, it was that. It was a different direction. I didn't expect it to have such a big impact on me, but it really did. And I think also at that point in time, it was quite nice to be introduced to something new and to learn something new. And I think also I was quite interested in. I made a lot of music when I was a young child. You know, I used to sing in choirs, and I know it sounds like a strange thing to say, but I think there was something about even working with the spoken voice and producing drama. There was something about instinctively using your ear, you know, to kind of create something that I think almost connected back to my interest in music as well. So there were lots of ways that it sort of inspired me, really, and it seemed like home. It seemed like the right place to be for me.
So I was wondering if you could expand on what actually inspires you.
Well, lots of things inspire me, really, but I think probably in the last few years I've been very inspired by sort of people in landscapes and looking at the reasons why people feel a connection to places and spaces, even if those things seem quite ordinary places like City Park or I don't know, or even their own back garden, really. And I think in some ways that's what attracted me to the Horticultural Society for this project. And I think the other thing that inspires me, or certainly something that's inspired me all my life, really, is stories. And since I've been working in radio, although I did start out working in radio drama where we worked with actors' voices, which I think are fantastic, but I'm kind of interested also in ordinary voices, i.e. when I say ordinary I just mean people who aren't performing, just kind of talking, and I guess and people's stories. So I think those are the things that really inspire me, and yeah, I'm kind of sometimes in a more general way and sometimes even in the very specific way of the kind of musical qualities of listening to different people's speaking voices I find really inspiring.
So what other projects have you worked on?
Do you mean radio-wise or just in general, or...?
I suppose, yeah, just in general, to give perhaps our listeners an idea of some of the projects you've done in the past in comparison to the one we're doing at the moment.
Okay, well, as I said, I've made quite a lot of drama for Radio 4, so those would be afternoon plays. I've directed a couple of episodes of The Archers. But I suppose in terms of being a bit more experimental with radio and trying out ideas, I decided in 2005 that I wanted to make a kind of audio walk for a park in Birmingham. Well, actually, we made a series of audio walks for the park, and that was inspired by the work of an artist called Janet Cardiff, who I was really interested in. I did one of her audio walks in Whitechapel in London, and I just thought this was fantastic because it kind of combined my interest in drama, in radio, and in places, and story really. And so in 2005, I did a project called Walk With Me, where we made a series of audio walks through Cannon Hill Park in Birmingham, and it was a combination of sort of fictional voices. So we kind of scripted some parts of it, but we also spent months interviewing people in the park, just people that jogged in the park, walked their dogs in the park rangers, all sorts of people, and we included their voices also in the audio walk. So it was a bit like a mobile drama documentary, I suppose. And we also commissioned a soundtrack for it from a composer that we knew, and it was really, it was a really great project. And since then I've made another, probably about 3 or 4 different, I suppose you'd call them site-specific audio projects, which usually involve people listening and walking, and it combines music and people's voices and story all kind of woven together. And the idea really is that it's a bit like when you go out with your MP3 player on, your headphones on, and you just walk around listening to music. But it's kind of more than that, because it explores your relationship with the environment that you're walking in, and because you're listening to something, it just kind of I suppose it's a bit like being in your own movie, really, being at the centre of your own film as you walk through a location or a space. So I've done a couple of those in parks, and I've also done another one along a sort of canal side in Worcester, and in a bit of Birmingham called Moseley Bog, which is a kind of a nature reserve in quite an urban part of Birmingham. So those are the sort of recent projects that I've been doing, but always doing interviews with people and incorporating voices and sound and music together.
At the moment, we're talking to Kate, and Kate is one of 3 sound artists working with us as part of Arts Transmission. Kate's working with the Sheppey Horticultural Society. We're talking to the first time as a bit of an introduction. And I was wondering, Kate, if you could perhaps expand on how you work with sound.
That's a very good point. Interesting question. I think probably the way I work with sound has changed quite a lot, really. Because obviously, when you make radio drama, it's quite a, for the BBC particularly, it's quite a sort of structured process. So you start off with a script, and you record the script with actors, and then you create, or you find sound effects and atmospheres that you then overlay into the drama. But I guess actually quite quickly, having worked in the studio making drama, which is a perfectly good way of doing it, I then sort of started working more on location, so taking actors out into environments and recording them, in the kind of places in which the drama is supposed to take place, or similar locations. And that just seemed to me to be much more dynamic, really, because then you're working with real sound, which is much rawer, much less predictable as well. You can't control it in the same way, but it does have an effect on the way actors perform, because they're responding to a real place rather than imagining that real place. So, for example, in the studio, if you're standing on a street and it's a scene where you're talking over traffic, you have to speak more loudly and imagine that you're speaking over the sound of traffic. Whereas if you go out on the street, you don't need to; you're just naturally doing it. But anyway, I guess now I'm much more interested in being a bit more experimental with it. And I think the way I work with sound usually starts with talking to people, and then kind of building out from there. So I may have an idea of what what kind of a soundscape might be or what a soundtrack might be, but I think everything has to kind of come from what the story is really, or what's at the heart of it, and that always comes from people and people's voices, for me anyway. So I think that's usually my starting point. That's what I know best and that's what I understand, and then other ideas about sound I will then go and perhaps record specific sounds that I want. And sometimes I've worked with composers who kind of really love to, for example, I remember once working with a composer and she was recording the sound of a fence vibrating in the park, and then she was taking that away and processing the sound and turning it into music, or using it as a strand within her music. And I'd love to be able to do that, but I don't really have quite the technical skill to be able to do that. But I'm really inspired by working with people who can do that.
So I suppose it's perhaps being aware of sounds, because often, say, I'm aware of it when you do interviews, so if you talk to somebody, you just hear their voice, but when you listen back to the recording, if there's something in the background or a noise, it's going to pick all that up, and I suppose you're looking at all those sounds and thinking about them.
Yeah, and the other thing that I do quite often is I teach acting for radio with drama students, and that's something else that I find really fascinating, because I'm always learning from them really. And one thing I find interesting about microphones and working with sound is how it's almost like, it's like a microphone can hear an emotion even when it's not being expressed. So in a pause, or if there is something at the back of the mind of the character, I'm always working with actors to try to explore how to be truthful, in their performances on the radio. And I think that's a really interesting thing, how silence and space between things, the microphone can sort of pick up the intensity sometimes of those moments without any explanation, and without you being able to see anything, not being able to see the actor's face, but somehow your ear can read all these complex emotional layers, so I find that really fascinating as well.
Okay, I was wondering how you come or wanted to work with the Society.
Well, I think one of the reasons was because, as I was saying before, I'm quite interested in the relationship between people and sites, locations, and so I was just really interested to find out in a bit of detail really how people connect with their allotments and what that relationship is with that plot of land, and how that impacts on people's lives. And also I've just got my own allotment up where I live in Nottingham, and so I'm a novice, so I suppose in a way I was hoping to learn something, but also, for me it's the beginning of understanding about what that is really. And we've been on a waiting list for quite a long time before that came through, so it was something that had been in my mind. But I think mainly it's because it sort of follows on from the other work that I've been doing that I was talking about, that walks in parks, etc. It felt as if this working with with people in the landscape would be a kind of natural follow-on from that, and in a new way that I hadn't done before.
So how are you going to work with the Horticultural Society?
Well, I think I'm still working that out really. My idea was to create sound postcards with people, so that it was almost like creating a postcard in sound that they would kind of send from their allotment. And that sounds a bit pretentious, but basically the idea was that I would ask people to identify the sounds which to them characterises their allotment, makes it theirs, makes it special to them. And then we would record those sounds. We'd record them talking about those sounds and why they're important to them. We would then record the sounds. And then I'd even ask them to write a postcard from their allotment to somebody else and record them reading those postcards. So that was the idea. But I think I've kind of got an open mind. I'm certainly going in with those ideas, but I think also the important thing about working on a project like this is to respond to people and to respond to what you find out when you talk to people really. So at the moment I've been down to the allotments this weekend, and I've just been talking to people so far about the sounds that they associate with their allotments, and people have been coming up with a few interesting ideas, and so I'm kind of taking it from there really.
So it's about you building up more of a relationship with the people and getting used to, and you coming up with how your ideas might work with the society.
Yeah, I think so. And I think ultimately, the reason why all those people are there, many of them have been there, had allotments for many, many years, is because of that special relationship they have with that place, and because it gives them something in their lives. So one way or another, I want the sound pieces that I make to reflect that relationship.
I was wondering how you're going to go about capturing the sounds that we experience and the plot holders experience.
Well, I think the way I want to capture them is as much as possible with the people that suggest them and people that are making them. So so in that sense, I want it to be collaborative, really. But as I said before, I'm not necessarily a very skilled technician, so I've got a bit of support from a kind of sound engineer who's going to help, Rose, who's going to help me do that. But essentially, it's just about finding the right microphone and setting up the recording so that you get a good sound. So it's a bit trial and error, I guess. But for example, one of the things somebody mentioned this weekend when I was interviewing her was she talked about the sounds of lots of different rotivators, particularly this time of year, that they're all at different distances from her, and they're all some are making higher pitch sounds, some are making lower pitch sounds, and it just gave me this idea, this sort of symphony of rotivators. So I've got an idea that it'd be nice to, seeing as so many people are using them, it would be good to try and find a selection of different ones with different sort of pitches and record them. And then I guess what we would do then is we'd just get the microphone, work out what the distance from the rotavator would be, record it, and then in the editing we'd put together, we sort of layer them together a bit and respond to her idea, which was that she described quite clearly to me, was this sort of in my mind, I'd describe it as a sort of musical cacophony of rotivators.
So you're talking a little bit about recording. What kind of equipment do you use in general?
To be really honest, I mostly use my trusty Zoom recorder. And for lots of things, it's really, really good. And I think technology moves on so fast these days that digital recorders like the Zoom recorders are really good, particularly for capturing speaking voice. But sometimes, I noticed it particularly this weekend when you're on a site like the allotment sites, which are quite exposed, and the wind's howling through, you need to protect the microphone, and you probably need a bit more of a directional microphone than you do get on a Zoom. So then you probably need something that's a little bit more specialised. It rather depends on the weather conditions and the nature of the sound that we're recording. But generally, when I'm talking to people, perhaps not so much on the allotments, but I find that the Zoom recorder is a pretty trusty piece of kit. And also it's not too obtrusive, so it's not enormous great thing that you're shoving in front of somebody's face, to record them. It's quite friendly. That helps as well.
Well, Kate, if you're happy we've covered everything, then I'd like to thank you very much for coming along, giving us an introduction into yourself and how you're going to start working with the Horticulture Society.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. I've enjoyed it so far, and I'm really looking forward to continuing. Thank you.